Um, so one of the things that you guys talked about was you didn't know necessarily how to um, like an email. It's just this little thing right here. You click that, and oh, look, I liked it. So not a big deal. Just letting you guys know that's how that works. Okay. So anyway, let's go ahead and unshare. Oh, that's not what I'm looking to do. Okay, so I'm going to unshare. So today what we are going to talk about is the evidence of evolution. If you guys remembered last week, we talked about the fact that there were 5 main parts to evolution. And I can go ahead and put that whiteboard thing up again and talk about it. So the first thing is going to be natural selection. And these are, let me go ahead. So mechanisms of evolution. Okay, and so there are 5 of them. The first one is natural selection. Okay, can anybody to remind me what natural selection is? And you can unmute yourself to do that, please.
Isn't it like where the ones, like you were talking about the birds with the long beaks, like the ones with longer beaks, the ones with shorter beaks would die, so then the longer beak ones that are made with longer beaks, and then eventually they just have long beaks.
Exactly. So over time, so essentially what natural selection is over time, due to competition, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Due to competition, and remember there has to be competition. That's not how you spell competition. Jesus. All right. So due to competition, traits that allow organisms to survive will be passed down. Okay, so it's kind of like that survival of the fittest. Okay, and remember, these are not creating new traits. These are just picking from best available traits. Okay, so that is one of them. Another one is going to be gene flow. Okay, and this is going to be organisms, new organisms joining a population. All right, number 3 is going to be genetic drift. Okay, this is going to be organisms leaving a population, and this is going to be could be due to death or just moving. The 4th one, you're going to need mutations, okay, random mutations, and these will cause new traits to form. Okay, and remember we talked, they're not like super common, but they do occur, all right? And then the 5th thing that you need to have is non-random mating, okay? And so this means there has to be, again, talking about the competition, a selective force drives who mates and who doesn't. Okay, so think about like bears or lions or anything like that. They're very territorial, okay? They're the ones with the bigger males, the ones who fight best are the ones who get to pick. With the birds of paradise, they do that goofy dance, and so they're going to be the ones that have the best option if they have the best dance, they're going to be the one that the female selects in terms of mating, okay? Does anybody have any questions about any of those, the mechanisms of evolution? Okay. And then just a quick, again, what evolution is. So evolution, this is going to be the change in allele frequency in a population over time. Okay, so a change in allele frequency in a population over time. And so allele frequency is just like if we were to count up how many people have blue eyes, how many people have brown eyes, how many people have green eyes. We can see the rough number of alleles in this group, which what we would call our population. And then say 3 more people were to join this Zoom meeting, we would have a different number. That would be like gene flow. We'd have people moving in. And so we would have new organisms, new people joining our population or joining this meeting. That would change the frequency in terms of number of green eye alleles, blue eye alleles, and brown eye alleles. All right, so that is a mechanism for evolution. And then over time, you know, this generally happens. All right, are there any questions about any of this stuff so far? Cool. I am going to stop sharing my screen now, and if you guys need to, you can go back and look at this in the YouTube video, unless anybody is like taking notes. If anybody is taking notes, please go ahead and say something now. So otherwise, I am going to stop sharing my screen.
I'm taking notes.
I'm taking notes.
Okay, so let me know when you're done, and you can. I'll stop this. Is anybody not done yet?
I'm not done.
Okay, so let me know when you're done, please.
Am I?
You can just say like done in like the chat, or you can unmute yourself, either way.
I'm done.
Okay. Parker, I see you're here. Is it just you, or is Taylor with you? Because I know like Sean. Just you?
Taylor's with me.
Okay, Taylor is with you. Okay, just making sure because I am giving grades for this, so I wanted to check. All right. Max, are you good? Or are you still writing?
I'm still writing.
Okay. And again, remember, I'm going to put this on a YouTube channel, and I'll send you guys the link to that channel. There'll be a playlist that says like biology, and I'll just post things to this. Right now, I guess would be a good time while she's getting that finished up for me to mention that we have spring break coming up, as if this already hasn't been weird enough in terms of scheduling. So we will not have school Thursday, Friday, or Monday, okay? So obviously Thursday and Friday do not affect you really in your classes on that you would have Monday and Wednesday. So like my class, 3rd period, 5th period, and 7th period. But you won't have classes on Thursday. If anybody's doing anything Friday in terms of your teacher, so like I do some office hours on Friday, those won't be happening. And then Monday, we won't have this, okay? So once we finish up Wednesday, we really don't have another class until next Wednesday, okay? All right, so Max is done. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing the screen now. And so what I wanna talk about today, now that we've kind of gone over some of that stuff, is I want to talk about all of the different pieces of evidence that we have for evolution, okay? And there's quite a few. We'll try and get through all of them today, but really between today, tomorrow, and next Wednesday, I'm gonna hope that we get through kind of talking about it, and then I will give you guys kind of a project to work on a little bit. So anyway, going into what I want to talk about, let's start with the fossil record. Okay, so I had you guys before talk about fossils, and most of you got that project done. If you haven't got that project done, get that done as soon as possible. I have put zeros in the grade book for people who didn't get that project done. But again, that will be gone as soon as you get something into me. And if you need like what that project is, you can always let me know. I can resend it to you. But anyway, so the fossil record shows us kind of historically where people were at, or not where people were at, how organisms have been, what organisms have changed, what organisms are different, and how they've changed over time. So we can see all these different things. Okay. And so the fossil record provides this record for species that have lived long ago, and they supply some of the most significant evidence for evolutionary change. All right. One thing that I want to show you guys is let's go here. So we can look at our current armadillo. All right. Very similar. And looking back in the fossil record, you can see things like this. It's called a glyptodont, okay? Glyptodonts share a lot of similarities with armadillos in terms of their structure. However, they are obviously not exactly the same, okay? But they do have a lot of similarities. And the same kind of, that their shell, or whatever you want to call it, is attached to like their rib cage, like an armadillo's is. Let me see if I can find a picture of that. But obviously they were significantly larger. Everybody knows roughly how big an armadillo is. A glyptodont, much larger than a armadillo. But if we look back through history, there have been a lot of things that have been a lot bigger throughout history. Okay, and so a lot of ancient ancestors are quite a bit bigger than our current ancestors, okay? Or our current ancestors, the current organisms that are on this planet. You can look at giant sloths. You can also look at things that haven't changed as much. Sharks have been around, but obviously there used to be things like the megalodon. So we have gotten smaller, but we can see these similarities in things over time, okay? And so I'm going to stop sharing this. There are what we call, I'm going to clear that. So there are two types of traits that we look at when we look at organisms over time. Okay, so you are going to have your derived traits, and these are things that we can see in the fossil record. Okay, so derived traits. These are going to be newly evolved features, okay? I'm still working on the fossil. Okay, Max, we can talk about it later. But anyway, so these are newly created or evolved traits that our ancestors did not have and appear very recently in fossil record. Okay, so these derived traits, these are the new traits that have been created pretty recently, all right? And so things like these that we didn't used to see before, derived traits are going to be things like, so an example, feathers, okay? We know at one point there were a group of dinosaurs, the theropods, so your things like raptors, Tyrannosaurus, those sorts of dinosaurs, began to grow feathers, okay? And kind of that link between the two is what is known as the Archaeopteryx, okay? It is the first dinosaur that we believe had feathers, okay? Not all dinosaurs had feathers, but starting to get into that later Cretaceous, there were a significant number of dinosaurs that did begin to have these feathers, okay? And so we can look at all these sorts of things and see that we have these new, newer feathers. These are a derived trait or a new trait, something that does not really appear in the old fossil record. Okay, and then the other types of traits we're going to have are ancestral traits. Okay, so ancestral traits. Okay, and so these will be features you can look back in the fossil record and see throughout it. Okay, and so these are going to be things like, so an example would be teeth. Okay, not all organisms had teeth, but pretty, you know, obviously we look back there, the first jawed fish were in like the, what was it? It was just after the Cambrian period. And so we began to have our first jawed fish. There began to be some organisms that had teeth. Pretty much everything after that that eats some sort of organism has been a toothed organism. And that's regardless of whether it's a carnivore or an herbivore. Herbivores have a lot flatter teeth for grinding. Carnivores have sharper teeth for ripping. Then you're going to have omnivores like us that have some teeth for both grinding and ripping. All right, but we can look back through time at these ancestral and derived traits. Okay, and so another example. Does anybody have any questions? I guess I should stop and check and make sure real fast. All right, if nobody has any questions, I guess I'll keep rolling. Okay, so the fossil record and looking at these derived and ancestral traits is a couple of different ways that we look at organisms, okay, and compare them. Another way, speaking of comparing, is through this thing called comparative anatomy. Okay, and it's exactly what it sounds like. This is where we look at the structures, okay, skeletons, and then sometimes when you're looking at things beyond just the skeleton, you can sometimes look at the organs of two different organisms and compare the two, okay? And so we have three different types of structures we look at when we're looking at comparative anatomy, okay? And the first one and the most important one is going to be homologous structures. Okay, so homologous structures are going to be, how do I want to put this? These are anatomically similar in the way they look, but different in the way they function. Okay, so can anybody think of any examples of a homologous structure? So it looks kind of similar, but it does different things. So it doesn't have to be with like two humans. Think of like humans and cats and bats and whales and all those different things. What do we have that's kind of similar?
Like a human and a gorilla, maybe?
So a human and a gorilla obviously have a lot of things in common. Chimpanzees are actually the thing we have most in common with. But I'm actually talking, so I'm going to go ahead. We'll come back to this screen in just a second, but I do want to show you guys what I'm talking about here. So let me type in homologous structures. Okay, and so if we look at homologous structures, we will start to see all of these. So this is a great picture right here. Hopefully it's big enough. it is. Let me get this out of the way. So if we look at the arms, okay, everything from your shoulder down in humans, horses, cats, bats, birds, and whales, okay? So all these are vertebrates, things that have a, spine. You can see the humerus in all of these. So your upper arm bone, okay, up where your bicep and tricep would be. This connects to your shoulder. That bone is the same. Looks a little different, but every organism has it, whether it is a human, a horse, a cat, a bat, a bird, or a whale. The whales have really stubby ones, all right? But we all have the same type of bones, okay? Now, obviously, there's some of these that are a little different. You can see here, humans have the radius, which is on the thumb side, and the ulna, which is on the pinky side. Horses, bats really only have the radius. Okay, they do not really have ulnas as much. Then you can start to see though that cats, birds, and whales all do have the ulna. That's not what I was looking to do. Oh, that was actually bigger. Whatever. And so you can see all those. And so you get your radius and your ulna, but you definitely have some sort of forearm bone in all of these, okay? You definitely do have a radius in each one of these organisms. Then we get down into it, and you can see the humans at the base of our fingers. You can see your carpal bones, which make up your wrist, okay? Horses also have carpal bones. Cats have carpal bones. Bats only have a few carpal bones. Birds have like one carpal bone. Birds are kind of weird. And then whales have quite a few carpal bones as well, all right? And then you go through, we have phalanges. Horses have like one big phalange that comes off, and that's like your fingers, so your metacarpals, which make up your hand, and then your phalanges, so carpals are your wrist, metacarpals are your hand, and then phalanges are your fingers, okay? Horses have like one big phalange that comes off to make the hoof. Cats have phalanges. Bats have really long phalanges that are connected by that membrane to give them a wing. Whales have really long ones, and that's covered in a flipper, all right? And so, is there any questions about that right now?
So is it just mammals with this stuff?
So, again, birds are in here, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
birds are,
Sorry.
that's fine. But we are looking at, you can do this with a lot of different things, okay? So even if you were to, I mean, it's hard to compare worms because worms don't really have a skeleton. The reason you use vertebrates is because usually vertebrates have a good skeleton. Invertebrates generally have like exoskeletons. So those would be things like bugs. But yeah, usually you're looking at vertebrates, things within non-exoskeleton, endoskeleton. So like us, how our skeleton is on the inside of our body, not the outside. You can look at pretty much any organism with an endoskeleton. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, and so basically with these being homologous structures, you can see that they look similar, maybe don't look super similar, but they look similar in terms of how they are constructed with the bones, but they do a lot of different things, right? Obviously, a bat wing, a bird wing, a whale flipper, and a human arm are all meant to do very, very different things, okay? Does anybody have any questions? I am going to stop sharing the screen and go back to the whiteboard screen. Okay. So homologous structures are anatomically similar in the way they look, but different in the way they function. All right. So we have homologous structures. Can anybody guess? So the next type of thing that we'll look at, we don't use these very often, analogous structures. Okay, so analogous structures. If homologous look similar but function differently, what do you think analogous structures do? See if anybody has a guess. So an analogous structure, they're basically the opposite of a homologous structure. These function in a similar way, but look completely different, okay? And so an example that we would use there, this would be like wings on birds and a housefly, right? Wings on birds and houseflies are both meant to make the organism fly, okay? Help propel it into the air and through the air. However, wings on birds look a lot different than wings on flies, okay? Which one of these analogous structures or homologous structures do you think are more useful when looking at how related two organisms are? Let me know whether you think it is analogous or homologous structures. And I'll wait because I need someone to reply to that. Oh, we got something there.
Is it analogous?
So you're going with analogous. Aaron went with homologous. He left that in the chat. It is homologous structures, okay? Analogous, because two different organisms can evolve to fly, but you can see that houseflies and birds have done it in two very different ways. Where looking at the analogous or the homologous structures, you can see that two organisms have began to evolve. They probably are more related due to similar anatomy, okay? So the similar anatomy is what really does drive two organisms being closer related, okay? The more similar your anatomy in terms of the way it looks, the more closely related you are, which is why somebody brought up gorillas. So a lot of those different primates, and we will talk about primate evolution pretty much exclusively here after we get through the basics of general evolution. But you can look at humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans. All of those fall under the primate family, and more specifically like the great ape kind of thing. Humans aren't monkeys, they're more derived from apes. And again, it's not like we evolved from chimpanzees, but chimpanzees and humans and gorillas and all those certain things had a common ancestor that is no longer on the planet, okay? That when people refer to that missing link, that's kind of what they're talking about. All right. So anyway, one last thing I want to talk about when I'm talking about comparative anatomy, and you guys might have heard of this before, but so let's go with vestigial structures. Okay, so vestigial structures, all right, these are going to be structures that have reduced forms of functional structures in organisms, reduced forms of functional structures in organisms that ancestors used to have. Okay, and so that's kind of a weird way to put it, but an example of vestigial structures, okay, let's go ahead. How about ostriches, right? What do ostriches have that is kind of useless to them at this point, but pretty much all birds have?
Wings.
Wings, okay? So let's extend this out. Okay, so examples of vestigial structures. Wings on ostrich, or wings on like a little kiwi bird. Does anybody know what a kiwi is? I'll go ahead and see if I can share this really fast. Okay, so if you look up at kiwi, I should say kiwi bird. Okay, there are these little tiny guys. All right, let me see if I can type in wing. Right there, you can see they have these absolutely ridiculous tiny little arms. Okay, and those arms are their old vestigial wings. Okay, um, they're essentially useless to them at this point, and they, you know, aren't really used for anything. I guess at least ostriches, they're kind of used for like balance and stuff. Another example of this, and many of you might not know this. So what connects at our pelvis? What two things come off of our pelvis that are pretty important for us to move?
Legs.
Yeah, your legs. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and look at whales. Whales have, all of them, this weird little pelvic bone, like an old little, it's even called here, a vestigial pelvis. Okay. Whales, do they have legs? I really hope people can answer that question.
No.
No, whales do not have legs. Okay. So let's go back to the whiteboard. Let's put in text. Okay. So another example is going to be whale pelvic bone. Okay. So with all of those things that are kind of sea mammals, so things like your whales, dolphins, manatees, all of those sorts of organisms, they have this kind of vestigial pelvic bone. And this is due to the fact that the way that they kind of figured is similar to how organisms moved from the ocean onto the land. At a certain point, there were organisms like whales that they basically began to, I don't want to say devolve, but they evolved to move back into the oceans. They decided that they were better suited for that. And so over time, what became, think of it almost like a hippo. Hippos are pretty well suited to live in water, but they do need to come out every once in a while. But if hippos started to like almost exclusively try and live in water, the hippos that would do best would be the ones that can swim the fastest. And things that would probably end up happening is that their legs would begin to evolve more into a flipper-like state. Things, the organisms that can push water the best with their feet would eventually move that way due to natural selection. So all of the organisms would start to, have these flatter feet that could push water better. And eventually they start needing, their back legs less. The back legs kind of become more of a drag. So then organisms with less, smaller back legs that drag a lot less, those will start to happen until they basically don't have any legs in the back anymore. Okay, and so that is essentially what happened with whales, is that they moved from land back to ocean, and then they lost back legs due to not needing them. But however, these back legs did, of course, then they left a vestigial pelvis. Okay? One thing's with humans, every once in a while, and I don't know the exact number, there are some humans that are born with what is called a vestigial tail, okay? Where your tailbone comes out, that essentially elongates for them, where they have a lot longer tail than they used to, or than they're supposed to at this point. There's nothing really wrong with that. You just happen to get a trait where you're showing this vestigial structure a little bit more than most people do, okay? So are there any questions about derived traits, ancestral traits, those three things we talked about with comparative anatomy, whether it's homologous, analogous, or vestigial structures? Or are we good there? Seems like nobody has any real questions right now. So if nobody has any questions, I will leave this up for, a couple minutes while you guys get this finished. 1 second, I'm going to stop sharing this for just a minute so that way I can see who's all on this meeting. So Sam and Shaw, you guys are together, and Taylor and Parker, you guys are together. Aaron and Cora joined in a little bit late. Okay. So anyway, that's about the number of people I figured I would see today. So we're really just missing Bailey, Connor, but Connor told me he couldn't make it, and then William. All right. So anyway, I will go ahead and throw that whiteboard back up. Remember, on Wednesday, you guys can use the exact same, whatchamacallit, link to get onto this. All right, this will be the same link. You'll just go ahead and put this in, or open it up the exact same way you guys did on Wednesday. We do not have class Thursday, Friday, or Monday, all right? And so after Wednesday, I won't really see you guys until next Wednesday. But anyway, make sure you guys are showing up to this. I am recording this, so if anybody wants to, I'll send out my link to my YouTube channel that I'm posting these on, and you can go back through and watch this. Kind of another resource. And if nobody has any questions, you guys can go ahead and log off. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
And if anybody has any questions about the project, I know that there were a couple of you who hadn't quite gotten it done. So Max, did you have a question?
Yeah, with that suit thing, are we supposed to isn't that kind of like a I'm trying to find it online and it doesn't really say much about it, to be
So
honest.
the primordial soup essentially was, before life, there were a bunch of things in this primordial soup, a lot of not exactly proteins, but pseudo proteins, kind of fake proteins. And eventually all of these different little molecules that were in there essentially were able to combine. So there are a bunch of different amino acids that we have in our bodies that pretty much control all of our proteins. But eventually these amino acids that were floating around in soup, this water that had a mixture of a bunch of other things in it as well, they started to combine. These amino acids would combine, and we basically made our first proteins. And then these proteins began to want to have something to encompass them. And essentially what you're going to have is you're going to get your first prokaryotic cells. So the really basic cells, things that like bacteria are in. So if you just look up primordial soup, and then look up things like first cell, that'll probably be some things. But again, you don't need a whole lot. You just kind of need to explain it. All right. Just
Okay.
a little bit. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. No
See
problem.
you, Schultz.
See ya. Max, do you want me to leave this whiteboard thing up, or you good?
I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this. All right. See you, Max. Let me know if you have any questions.